Good morning and welcome to DSW's Level 5 Operations Manager webinar. In this session, we'll be unpacking the new assessment plan, having a look at the assessment methods and all the policies and procedure around the new Operations Manager standard. My name is Sam Perry. I'm the product owner here at DSW and I am responsible for Operations Manager. So I've been the one to develop all of our materials, including the toolkit, for this new standard. I'm joined by my colleague here, Mary, from the quality team. Mary will be manning the chat and the Q&A so we can facilitate the Q&A session following the slides. So the agenda for this webinar, we'll be having a look at the standard and giving you an overview, the on-program and gateway requirements, the assessment methods themselves, including the professional discussion underpinned by a portfolio of evidence, the written project report with presentation and questioning, the grading, supporting resources, specifically the amplification, and then a question and answer session at the end. So an overview of the new OM standard. The EPA period is typically 5 months in duration, and this is the period in which all assessment methods will be completed. Before the apprentice comes through to the EPA period, they'll be in their on-program period, in which they will collect and develop the evidence for their portfolio of evidence, and they will also complete their project. One major difference between the old or the current version of operations or departmental manager and this new standard is DSW no longer needs to see sight of the project itself, have any input, or have any confirmation on the scope or the completion of the project prior to EPA. The only time DSW and our assessors have any sight of the project is once the apprentice is in the EPA period and has submitted their assessment materials. So once the apprentice is ready for Gateway, they will submit their Gateway documents and their Gateway requirements. They will then have their planning meeting, standard planning meeting between the apprentice, if they wish to attend the planning meeting, the assessor and the training provider. DSW does recommend apprentices attend these planning meetings or be party to them, as it allows the assessor to introduce themselves to the apprentice. So come assessment day, the assessor isn't some faceless human who will turn up to assess them. They have already been introduced, they know who they are, and there's a sense of comfort and knowing in being a part of the planning. The assessment methods themselves then, the written project report with presentation and question. So once the apprentice has come through Gateway, they have a maximum of 12 weeks to develop their written project report and their presentation materials. They are then submitted at the end of this 12-week period. Once those have been submitted, the apprentice will then complete their presentation and questioning session itself, and that is 2 weeks minimum following the submission of assessment materials. The professional discussion is underpinned by the portfolio of evidence, which is submitted at Gateway, and that takes place 2 weeks as a minimum once the apprentice has come through Gateway. So the specific requirements for Gateway you have the Gateway Declaration, the proof of the Level 2 English and Maths, and the portfolio of evidence, along with a completed referencing table. So the portfolio of evidence itself is designed to be a showcase of the apprentice's best work. It should therefore focus on quality over quantity, and in doing so, the training provider and the apprentice should ensure for each of the criteria for the assessment method, they have the best piece of evidence possible. The evidence should be and must be work-based examples to support their understanding of the KSBs and the assessment descriptors. The supporting documentation for the development of a portfolio of evidence. You have the amplification, which is embedded in the toolkit. And just a side note here, the toolkits will be made available following this webinar by the end of the week at the latest. You also have DSW's portfolio requirements document. This document is live and available already for you to access on EPA Pro, and it just goes through the types of evidence that can be included within a portfolio and how to structure and best develop a portfolio of evidence. So moving on to the professional discussion. This is supported by and underpinned by that portfolio of evidence. It consists of 11 pass and 6 distinction descriptors, and it is a structured discussion between the assessor and the apprentice themselves. The assessment method will last for a maximum of 60 minutes, and there is an additional 10% added time that can be included at the assessor's discretion. This is to allow the apprentice to come to a natural stopping point in their response, so the assessor isn't cutting them off halfway through providing some evidence. In the preparation for the professional discussion, the assessor will review the portfolio of evidence, and based on the content, will plan a minimum of 6 discussion points. These will be contextualised to the apprentice and the evidence they've provided, and for each core discussion point the assessor asks, they have an unlimited amount of prompts they can use. These prompts are to facilitate a natural, free-flowing conversation and to probe for any extra information, context, or evidence. The apprentice is permitted to bring a copy of their portfolio, the referencing table, and notes to their assessment. And the supporting documents for this assessment method, we have the amplification, the conditions for live assessment, and the sample questions. The amplification and the sample questions will be included in the toolkit once that's been published. The conditions for live assessment is live and available for you to access now. And again, that's on EPA Pro for you to download. The written project report with presentation and questioning. So the project, as I mentioned at the start, is completed during the on-programme period. So that's a big difference between this standard and the previous version. DSW does not need to see any scope around how the project is going to be conducted, completed, how the project was selected. The only input DSW has is when the assessment is due to take place and the assessor is having a look at the report itself and assessing the presentation with questions. The assessment method itself consists of 11 pass and 4 distinction descriptors. And following the approval of Gateway, the apprentice has a maximum of 12 weeks in which to complete their written report, develop their presentation materials, and get both submitted to DSW. This 12-week period commences as soon as Gateway has been approved. Work on these two components must not start until the apprentice has had Gateway approved. The written report then must include the following areas: an executive summary, an introduction, scope and business need for the project, research and analysis outcomes, project outcomes, discussion of findings, recommendations and conclusions, and then referencing from external resources. These must be included within their report, but the apprentice can also add their own headings and subheadings in addition to best suit their project and the evidence they are providing. Reports must be between 3,600 and 4,400 words. With this new standard, DSW are being strict with the policing of this word count range. And it's worth noting here, should apprentices submit any reports outside of this word count range, it will be marked as a fail, and a new project with written report and project and presentation materials must be completed and submitted. The rationale behind this new policy is to ensure a fair experience for all apprentices, so no apprentice gets more time than anyone else in the development of their materials, and apprentices who do submit reports within the word count correctly aren't penalised by having other apprentices have more time. The resources available for this assessment method, we have the amplification and the project and presentation writing guide. Both of these will be made available in the toolkit once that is published following this webinar and by the end of the week at the latest. So moving on to the presentation and questioning component of the assessment. This will take place a minimum of 2 weeks after the report and presentation materials have been submitted. The presentation and questioning will last for a maximum of 60 minutes, but there is a discretionary 10% the assessor can add on to allow the apprentice to come to a natural stopping point in their response. A maximum of 22 minutes will be applied for the presentation, and this is to ensure sufficient time for the questions to be asked following the presentation. It is recommended apprentices practice their presentation with their materials prior to submitting and prior to their assessment to ensure it's around the 20 to 22 minute mark. The questioning then has a minimum of 40 minutes. Within the questioning session, the assessor will ask a minimum of 6 questions and a maximum of 15. For each core question the assessor asks, they have 2 follow-up questions they can use. Again, these questions are to probe for additional information, context, or evidence. Resources available: the amplification, the sample questions, and the project referencing table. So the grading of both assessment methods. In order for an apprentice to achieve a pass, they must meet all pass descriptors relevant to the assessment method. And for the distinction, they must hit all the pass and or the distinction. Translating this through to the overall grading, for an apprentice to achieve an overall pass, the apprentice must achieve a pass in both assessment methods, and for the distinction, they must achieve a distinction in both also. So the supporting resources DSW has produced for apprentices and training providers include the amplification, the project referencing table, the portfolio referencing table, sample questions, the report and presentation writing guidance. All of these documents I've mentioned will be included in the toolkit. We also have DSW's portfolio requirements document and conditions for live assessment. These are available now on EPA Pro for you to access. We also have document templates for the portfolio context statement, witness testimony, and observations. We also have a DSW YouTube channel on which there are many videos on other standards, other webinars, and helpful videos of how to build toolkits and guidance videos for you to watch. Moving on specifically to the amplification then. So DSW believes amplification is one of the most important documents we can develop and provide. The purpose of it is to provide clarity to any areas of the descriptors that may be complex, vague, or ambiguous. I'll show you an example of an amplification for this standard on the next slide, where we have provided lists to aid in the understanding of the requirements and to provide context and clarity. These lists are not exhaustive. We have only provided a snapshot of some of the examples that an apprentice can include as part of their evidence. If we were to include all examples, the document would be absolutely huge. And so we've just given an idea to help in the understanding of what is required. So as you can see in this example, this is taken from the amplification for Operations Manager. At the top there is the KSB theme, or the theme KSB. In the first column, you have the knowledge, skills, and behaviours. You've then got the descriptor to which the apprentice will be assessed against, and then you have the amplification there. For each descriptor, what we initially do is we provide a breakdown of exactly what the descriptor is asking for. So you can see for P1 on this example, the apprentice must provide one example of a problem they found during their project and detail how it was identified. So there we've provided an exact quantifiable number of what is required, so one example of a problem they found. They also must detail the methods taken to reach informed judgments and find solutions through their use of data research, analysis, interpretation, evaluation. Apprentices must provide one method used for each of the above, 4 in total, or one that includes all. So in that breakdown, the apprentice will be able to understand exactly what they need to provide, how much they need to provide in order to achieve that descriptor. Underneath that initial breakdown, you can see there we have a few words, terms, or phrases that have been emboldened that we have identified in the descriptor as potentially being open to interpretation. And so we have provided a definition. So you can see problems refer to anything that has a negative impact or effect on the work progress, goals, and targets of the team. In these definitions, as I've said on the previous slide, should there be a list of examples provided, apprentices don't have to use those included. They can provide others. We have only just provided a snapshot to aid in the understanding of the descriptor. And so with that, we will now move on to the question and answer section of the webinar. And so my colleague Mary will be reading out your questions, and hopefully we can provide some answers for you.
Okay, thank you, Sam. So the first question, if the report is generated during on-programme training, is there no longer a requirement for the project to happen after DSW have agreed it is suitable?
Okay, so the project is completed during the on-programme period. There is no requirement for it to continue into the EPA. What we would suggest is the apprentice's involvement in that project is completed before they reach Gateway and EPA. Obviously, depending on the size of the company, the size of the project, it may be an ongoing project that has multiple stakeholders, multiple objectives, but we would recommend the apprentice's involvement is complete or near complete before they get to EPA. And what was that, the second part of that question, sorry?
Is there no longer a requirement for the project to happen after DSW have agreed it is suitable?
So, as I mentioned at the top, one of the major differences between this version and the previous versions is DSW no longer has any input into the selection, the appropriateness and or completion of the project. The only site we see is the project output, which includes the report and the presentation materials.
Okay. Are words included in appendices excluded from the 3,600 to 4,400 word count?
Yes. In the toolkit, there will be clear guidance on, and it's not just in the toolkit, sorry, it'll be in the toolkit and the project and presentation writing guidance. There will be clear parameters as to what is included in the word count and what is excluded.
Okay. Will there be specific support on the word count? For example, will it state what needs to be omitted, included, i.e. omitting tables, references, titles, etc.?
Yeah, so as I've just mentioned there, in the project and presentation writing guidance, which will be available in the toolkit once that's published, there will be clear guidance around what is included and excluded in the word count of the project.
Okay. Just confirming, is the guidance that an apprentice should have 6 months on programme to complete their workplace project, and therefore is the project duration subject to any level of checking at EPA?
So there is no checking of the project at EPA. The project can take as long as it can, or as long as you want it to during the on-programme period. And again, we do suggest apprentices' involvement in that project is either complete or near complete when the apprentice is ready to come into EPA for their assessments.
Okay. If a learner fails one of the EPA assessments and resits, can they still achieve an overall grade of distinction?
So for the new operations manager standard, there is a grade cap. So should an apprentice fail any of the assessment methods, they will only be able to achieve a maximum grade of a pass.
Okay. As we don't have access to your EPA Pro, how do we access this recording?
So the recording of this webinar and the slides will be made available on the DSW YouTube page. We will also send out a link for you to access this webinar recording.
Okay. What is in place to support learners to go through Gateway with E3 instead of Level 2 under the new funding clarification?
So for the E3, as opposed to the Level 2 English and Maths, there is clear guidance provided. Should an apprentice have the E3, DSW will just need to be made aware of that, and the relevant documentation as detailed will need to be provided. And I'm not overly sure where those requirements are provided. But if you do have access to that, I would encourage you to have a read through, have a look at what requirements there are, the documentation that will need supplying to us, ready for Gateway.
What do we do with learners registered on the previous version of OM?
So the previous version of OM, so Operation Departmental Manager, is still live, and we do have apprentices in assessment and due to come through Gateway on that standard. It's not going anywhere. If you have apprentices on the old version or on the previous version, under the new ESFA funding rules, they can switch to this new version. If they do switch to the new version since being registered on the previous, they can't then go backwards. Any apprentices registered on the new version can't jump down to the old, but it's at the discretion of the apprentice, the training provider, as to if you have apprentices on the previous version, which is still live and will stay live, whether you want to transfer them onto the new one. But yeah, it's not going anywhere.
Okay, thank you. Please can you explain the process again if a learner fails their report or their presentation? Thank you.
So it depends on the reason for their failure of the assessment method. Should an apprentice fail their written project report with presentation and question assessment method, if they fail that because they weren't able to meet some of the criteria, they can just take a resit. Should they fail because their project report was outside of the word count, it will require them to do a brand new project and a report and new presentation materials be developed for the resit. The same goes for any missed deadlines. If an apprentice misses a submission deadline, that will automatically result in the failure of the assessment method, a new project report, and a new presentation materials will have to be completed.
Is the apprentice optional at the planning meeting?
They are optional. DSW does encourage the apprentice to be party to those planning meetings where possible. This is to allow the assessor to introduce themselves to the apprentice. So come assessment day, the assessor isn't this unknown figure who will just turn up one day to assess them against the standard. It adds that level of understanding and comfort as to who everyone is. It also makes clear when the assessment methods are going to take place and the deadlines. But it is down to the discretion of the apprentice whether they want to be a part of it or not, and it is optional.
Okay. Does the project have to be fully completed then?
So I think I touched on this a little bit earlier. So we understand, depending on the size of the apprentice's workplace and organisation and the size of their project, it may be unrealistic for a project to be completed within the 2-year on-programme period. What we do suggest is the apprentice's involvement in that project is either completed or nearing completion when they are ready to come into EPA.
Okay. Are the project and presentation marked separately or together?
So the project and the presentation are components of the same assessment method. So the assessment method is the written project report with presentation and questions. So you've got 3 different components there within the assessment method. Together, they provide the assessor with a clear overview of the apprentice's abilities, and all of the output come together to support the assessor's grading decision. We do encourage apprentices to target as many of the assessment descriptors in their written report as they can. That way, the presentation and the questioning becomes a mop-up session or an opportunity for the assessor to understand a little bit more around the apprentice themselves, their role, their organisation, the evidence they provided, and also to probe for any additional information or evidence that may be required. So while the project isn't itself given a separate grade to the presentation and the questioning, it is involved. It's all they are all part of one assessment method.
Okay, you said if the project is a fail, they must do a new project. What is the time scale for this?
So if the apprentice if an apprentice fails because they have either gone outside of the word count range or they haven't submitted in time on their deadline, this is when they will have to do a new project with new project outcomes, report and presentation materials. Should this be the case, apprentices will be given 6 months to complete their resit from the initial fail notification. It is worth noting apprentices can either do a resit or a retake. A resit is sitting the assessment method again. In this scenario, they would need that new project completing. A retake is going back into learning and coming through Gateway again. It is for a conversation to be had with the apprentice, the training provider, and the workplace as to which is taken, and should a project need to be completed again because they've either not been in that word count or they've missed their deadline, DSW and the training provider will facilitate conversations to better understand the timelines.
Okay. How many pages of notes can they have at EPA?
So we don't mandate a maximum amount of notes apprentices can take into their assessment methods. It's at the discretion and the preference of the apprentice as to how many notes they take to their assessments.
Okay. Do learners just submit a report, or is there a project scope as well?
There is no scope, so DSW does not need to see any form of scope, any form of planning, confirmation of the project, what the project is, what it's going to entail. The apprentice will just need to submit their report once they have come through Gateway, along with their presentation materials.
Okay. At the start of Gateway, do we hand in any documentation regarding the learner's project?
So I think that's referring to a scope. So no, the only thing we need are those Gateway requirement documents. So the declaration, the portfolio with referencing table, and the proof of the English level 2 English and maths.
Okay. Are you giving project titles?
No, So again, DSW will have no input into what project is completed. It's down to the apprentice, the training provider, and the employer to decide on the best project to be completed, to give the apprentice the best opportunity to meet the grading descriptors.
Okay. You just completed the project report to the portfolio of evidence. The portfolio is not graded. Does this mean the project report is not graded too?
So the project report doesn't receive a specific grade. It forms the basis of the presentation and the question and answer session. So all of those elements combined will be awarded a singular grade because that is the all-encompassing assessment method.
So the written report only underpins and doesn't contribute to the final grade?
Yes. So the presentation is an overview of the report. The report itself is an opportunity for the apprentice to provide evidence from the project itself, but it doesn't get a specific grade. They will only receive one grade for the written report, the project, the presentation, and the questionings as a whole.
Okay. Looking at the Institute for Apprenticeships for the project, I cannot see evidence where the learner would fail regarding the word count and would need to complete an entirely new project. Is this consistent with all endpoint assessment organisations?
So this is a policy rule that DSW has implemented for this standard. The assessment plan provides a maximum word count with a plus or minus 10% discretionary. What DSW has done is we've taken that maximum with the plus or minus 10%, we've added that on to provide a word count range. So you've got your bottom and your top for the range, and apprentices must ensure their project report word count fits in that range. The reason why DSW have taken this approach and have implemented this policy is to ensure all apprentices have the same experience, have the same amount of time to work on their project, reports and presentation materials. So apprentices can't submit a report over a word count or under the word count, have it sent back to them to amend, in which doing so they would be then given more time over any other apprentice who was successful in providing a report within the word count. So that's why we are being strict with this new policy, because we don't want to disadvantage any apprentices within the new standard.
Okay. Will the assessor only ask pass level questions at both assessments, and will it be up to the learner to then move their answer onto the associated distinction answer?
So our assessors will always endeavour to cover all of the pass criteria first in the assessment method to achieve that base layer grade. So all apprentices can at least try to achieve a pass. The assessor will then also use follow-up questions or other core questions to target distinction criteria. So it's not down to the apprentice to tailor their responses to the distinction descriptors. The assessor will ask questions to target the pass and the distinction themselves.
Okay. Has the leadership support element been removed?
Yes. So in the development of the new standard and the new assessment plan, IFATE have changed some of the learning areas, the descriptors, the KSBs, and that's one area which has changed.
Okay. You said yesterday that level 3s no longer have to do a presentation mapping, but level 5 still do. Am I correct?
Yes. So just repeat that question again for me, Mary. Sorry.
Yeah. You said yesterday that level 3s no longer have to do a presentation mapping, but level 5 still do. Am I correct?
Yes, because we have in this standard in the level 5, because we have the project report and the presentation, which are both part of one assessment method. That's why that referencing table has been included in the level 5 operations manager, but in the team leader, which I don't want to get too much into, it's not included in there.
Okay. The assessment plan states for the project report and presentation the following. The independent assessor must make the grading decision. They must assess the project components holistically when deciding the grade. Does that mean the project report and presentation are both graded holistically?
Yes, both components are part of one assessment method. So the assessor will use the evidence and provided in the report, use any evidence provided in the presentation, and use any evidence provided in the questioning session to base their grading judgment.
Okay. I'm really struggling to understand the fail on a project over the word count, especially if the project isn't graded. What if an apprentice does not complete another report? This is a big ask of any apprentice.
So I understand and can I can understand it is quite a strict rule to implement. Again, the reason why we've done this is to ensure a fair assessment experience for all apprentices across all training providers on this standard. We don't want to disadvantage any by allowing apprentices any additional time to make amendments to a project if they fall outside of that word count, because they could also then start to change, tweak, add in, take away evidence. And so they would have then more time to do that, whereas an apprentice who submits first time within the word count range would then obviously have less time than someone else who has to go away and amend theirs.
So both the written project and the presentation slides are mapped, yes?
Yes, so there is one referencing table for both of those components because they are part of one assessment method. We do encourage the apprentice to target as many of the pass descriptors as they possibly can within their report. They will then obviously indicate this within their referencing table. If they want to provide any evidence within their presentation, they can do so, and they can use that referencing table to say, this particular piece of evidence is going to be provided in my presentation on this slide.
I don't feel I have clarity on this. Does the written report contribute to the component grade? We know that the portfolio does not, it underpins. Does the report contribute or underpin?
So the evidence provided in the project report, the assessor will review that when it's submitted along with the presentation materials. That evidence will be used to contribute towards the assessor's grading decision, as well as any other evidence provided in the presentation and the questioning or the responses to the questions in the questioning session.
I would think the project should meet all the past descriptors. Does the presentation have to cover all as well?
So as I've mentioned, we do suggest apprentices target all of the past criteria, or as many of the past criteria as they can within their project. The apprentice can also provide evidence within their presentation. However, the presentation is only a set amount of time. It may be difficult to cover all of the criteria within the presentation, hence why we say try and meet as many, if not all, within the project report.
Okay. Previously, you used to say you wouldn't read past a certain word count. Isn't this a better idea than a fail?
So the reason why we have moved towards this this policy decision is if an apprentice provides too many words for a report, there is real risk they are not being concise enough and being not as specific as they would like to be to target their descriptors. And if they are under the word count, then they again are at risk of not hitting the criteria adequately enough. Again, we are trying to ensure a fair experience in assessments for all apprentices in the application of this new rule.
I'm assuming the fail on the project due to the word count is only if this is under, not over.
No, if the apprentice submits any report outside of that range, whether it goes over the range or is under the range, it will be a fail.
Are the report and the presentation both mapped?
It depends on where the apprentice wants to provide their evidence. If they want to provide all of their evidence in their report, they will just map the report. If they want to provide all of their evidence in their presentation, they map to the presentation. If they want, if they want to split half and half, they map to both. But again, we do suggest they try and target as many, if not all, of the descriptors within their report.
So can you just clarify, the word count is only in place for the report and doesn't include the presentation words?
That's correct, yes.
The EPA plan for Apprenticeships England states the project report must have 4,000 words with a 10% above or below this word count.
Yes, so that's where we have calculated and come up with this word count range. So we've taken that max word count the assessment plan has provided. We've also taken the plus or minus 10% discretionary they allow. We've added that and we've done the calculations and we've come up with that range. That's where that's come from.
As the presentation mapped in the 22 minutes, are you looking for all the descriptors to be talked about?
So the presentation, again, it is a limited amount of time. So it may not be possible for them to talk about all of the descriptors pertinent to this assessment method, which is why we suggest they target them, or as many of them as they possibly can do in their report. But evidence and descriptors can be evidenced within the presentation itself.
Will the presentation be stopped at 22 minutes precisely, regardless of where they are up to?
So the assessor will stop them at 22 minutes. They will allow them to finish what they're saying before they stop them, so they don't cut them off halfway through what they're saying. But it is a hard stop at 22 minutes. Again, we advise apprentices to practice their presentations to make sure they are around the 20 to 22 minute mark. The reason for this cut-off at 22 is to ensure all apprentices get the same amount of time in their questioning session and there is adequate time for the assessor to ask all of the questions they need to do.
A summary indicates not everything needs to be talked about.
In the presentation.
Not
So the presentation is a summary and really an overview of their report. The report is the biggest component of the three in this assessment method. So in the presentation, yes, not all of the areas may necessarily be covered. Again, that it is a reduced time frame that they have. But across the three components, the report, the presentation, and the questioning, there is ample opportunity for the assessor to get an understanding and get evidence for the descriptors and for the apprentice to provide that.
And these answers suggest that the project report must impact the final grade.
It does, yes. So all three components of this assessment method, the report, the presentation, and the questioning, all are used by the assessor to inform their grading decision.
And that was the final question.
Brilliant. Thank you very much. So I'd like to now take this opportunity to thank you all for your attendance. I do hope you have found this webinar useful, informative, and it has cleared up some areas of unknowing and answered some of your questions. I'd also like to thank my colleague Mary for supporting with this webinar and manning the questions, and the wider DSW team for facilitating this webinar. We will be posting a survey. If we could ask you to take some time just to complete that, it will give us a better idea of how these webinars are received and what we can do in the future to improve them. If you do have any questions remaining, or you think of any going forward, or you have any concerns, please feel free to reach out via email or via call to DSW, and we will support you where we can. Again, thank you very much for your time, and enjoy the rest of your day. Thank you very much.